March 20th, 2003, 5:30 in the morning, Baghdad time. The first cruise missiles hit the city while most of its people are still asleep. Within 21 days, the most powerful military machine on Earth will have overthrown a government, destroyed an army, and driven one of the most brutal dictators in the world into hiding. It will be one of the fastest, most technologically dominant military victories in history, and it will be the beginning of one of the longest, most costly disasters in American foreign policy. How does the same war produce both of those things? That is the question this video answers, because the story of the 2003 Iraq invasion is not just a story about what America got right on the battlefield. It is a story about what was decided and what was not decided, long before the first missile ever flew. Stay with me. Because the decisions made in Washington, D.C., before a single soldier crossed the Kuwaiti border, shaped everything that came after. The United States had been in a slow-burning conflict with Iraq since the Gulf War ended in 1991. American and Allied jets were already flying daily patrols over Iraqi no-fly zones, zones that Iraqi air defense regularly fired on. Thousands of U.S. troops were already stationed in the region. The military had a war plan on file, Operational Plan 103. The problem? Plan 103 was defensive, and it called for far more troops than Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld was willing to deploy. Rumsfeld had a vision for a new kind of American warfare, fast, lean, and decisive. Small forces, advanced technology, overwhelming speed. He pushed relentlessly for lower troop numbers, cutting them further and further as planning continued. Military commanders, including CENTCOM's General Tommy Franks, pushed back. The argument went on for months. A CENTCOM officer later described the chaos. Every request from Washington demanded revised numbers, revised plans, revised timelines. The constant back and forth drained the energy that should have been spent on one critical question: what happens after the shooting stops? That question never got a real answer. The final invasion plan only took shape in early 2003. It was built for speed. Coalition troops, 170,000 of them, the majority American, with Britain providing the second-largest ground force, would cross from Kuwait, bypass the southern cities, and drive straight for Baghdad. Speed, surprise, and deception would dislocate Iraq's larger conventional forces before they could respond effectively. Special forces would infiltrate first, sowing confusion. Air and ground attacks would begin simultaneously. British forces would secure Basra, Iraq's second city. American armored units would punch straight up the Euphrates Valley. It was an audacious plan, and against the Iraqi military of 2003, it worked almost perfectly. Here is something that almost nobody outside the military knew at the time. Saddam Hussein did not believe the Americans were actually coming, and that miscalculation shaped everything about how Iraq fought and lost the war. While American planners were arguing over troop numbers in Washington, Saddam Hussein was making his own calculations about the threat. He believed, based on America's previous behavior, that the U.S. would launch airstrikes, not a full ground invasion, or that last-minute cooperation with UN weapons inspectors might defuse the crisis entirely. After all, that's what had happened before. Why would this time be different? So Saddam positioned most of his conventional forces to face the threats he considered more likely: Iran to the east, Kurdish separatists in the north. Only one Republican Guard division sat near the Kuwaiti border. His best troops were spread across the country, partly to prevent them from becoming the backbone of a potential coup against him. That last point reveals something important about Saddam's Iraq. The regime was as afraid of its own military as it was of any foreign enemy. The most talented, capable commanders were kept out of critical positions precisely because they were talented and capable. Party loyalty mattered more than military competence. One Iraqi officer, captured after the war, put it bluntly, the army had no one capable of even attempting to lead a fight against the most advanced military on Earth. Smart officers existed, even brilliant ones, but they weren't in command. Iraq did have one asymmetric plan that would cause real problems: the Fedayeen Saddam, an irregular volunteer force controlled by the Ba'ath Party, not the conventional army. Their mission was to drag the coalition into bloody urban street fighting, the one environment where American technological superiority would count for the least. It was a reasonable strategy. It just wasn't enough. The ground offensive officially begins on March 20, 2003. Coalition morale is electric. Marines who get the order to move describe the moment as charged, almost euphoric. The culmination of months of preparation finally released into action. The advance is extraordinary by any historical standard. US V Corp drives north through the Euphrates Valley toward Baghdad. The 1st Marine Expeditionary Force and British 1st Armored Division secure the Rumaila oil fields, which Iraq had not, contrary to intelligence warnings, prepared for sabotage, and take the Faw Peninsula. Coalition forces push into Qasr, Iraq's only port. Iraqi conventional resistance is light almost everywhere, partly because coalition troops deliberately avoid urban areas, partly because the Iraqi army is simply unprepared for the speed of the assault. Whole units simply go home rather than fight. But the Fedayeen are a different problem. On March 23rd, the war produces its first major American disaster, not from an Iraqi military unit. From a wrong turn, 18 trucks and Humvees from the 507th Maintenance Company, a support unit, not a combat force, accidentally drive into the Iraqi-held city of Nasiriyah. When they realize the mistake, it's already too late. Iraqi fighters ambush the convoy. 11 of the 33 American soldiers are killed. 7 are captured. Task Force Tarawa, 3 Marine companies, arrives on the outskirts to find survivors and secure 2 critical bridges. What follows is a case study in how quickly a battle can unravel. The tanks supporting Company B leave unexpectedly for refueling, leaving infantry to advance under heavy fire. Company B gets bogged down in swampy ground. Company C, assuming B has already pushed through, enters the city and drives into an ambush. They reach the Saddam Canal, but come under mortar barrages and swarming infantry attacks from every direction. In the chaos, half of Company C's vehicles withdraw without orders. Their commander is left fighting with half his force. Unable to reach the withdrawn vehicles on the radio, they've simply disappeared into the smoke and confusion. Air support arrives, A-10 Warthog attack aircraft, among the most effective close air support platforms the U.S. military has. But the A-10s aren't equipped to identify Company C's thermal identification panels. They attack Company C instead. 2 Abrams tanks have to physically storm down what survivors will call Ambush Alley to rescue Company C. 18 Marines are killed, potentially 10 of them by friendly fire. The same day, a deep Apache helicopter raid against Iraqi positions around the Karbala Gap, meant to be a decisive blow, collapses when Iraqi ground fire damages 31 of the 32 helicopters involved. 1 is shot down. The Apaches cause minimal damage. Then, a massive sandstorm hits on March 24th, grinding the advance to a halt. Back in Baghdad, Iraqi state television runs footage and claims its forces are driving the Americans back. The reality on the ground is the opposite, but for a few days, the narrative is uncertain, and the Pentagon is genuinely worried about what the optics of a stalled advance will do to public support back home. The pause lasts until March 29th. Then, the advance resumes and accelerates. US V Corps drives through the Karbala Gap, the last major geographic obstacle between Kuwait and Baghdad. The battle at the Musayyib Bridge, Objective Peach, is fought under a heavy American smokescreen with Apaches, Bradley fighting vehicles, and assault boats. Iraqi artillery hits American vehicles but cannot penetrate their armor. The bridge falls. By early April, U.S. forces are at Baghdad's airport. And then comes the Thunder Run. Colonel David Perkins, commanding the 2nd Brigade Combat Team, proposes something aggressive. A heavy armored column driving straight through Baghdad, not to hold territory, but to determine the enemy's strength, kill Iraqi fighters, and psychologically break the will of the city's defenders. The first Thunder Run on April 5th sends 28 Abrams tanks and 14 Bradley vehicles straight up Highway 8 into the city center. The column takes immediate fire, intensity building as it advances. Iraqi trucks are destroyed, but the Thunder Run coincides with the morning commute. Civilians are caught in the crossfire. What American tankers see that morning stays with them. Tank Platoon Sergeant Eric Olson later describes the worst moment of his military career. A destroyed civilian car, a family caught in the wrong place at the wrong moment, a father dying in the road, a mother holding an infant, a child. Olson's words are impossible to read without feeling the full weight of what urban warfare costs. The column fights through to the airport, claims 2,000 Iraqi troops killed, loses 1 Abrams, which U.S. forces later destroy themselves to prevent its capture. The Iraqi government broadcasts footage of the destroyed tank as evidence they defeated the attack. Perkins wants to go again, this time all the way to the city center, and stay there. His commander, General Wallace, is skeptical. He approves what sounds like a repeat of the first run, a probe, not an occupation. Perkins either doesn't receive that order or decides to interpret it differently. On April 7th, his armor turns into central Baghdad and drives to the presidential district. He decides to stay. The next hours are among the most intense of the entire war. Perkins needs ammunition resupply, but his supply trucks aren't armored. Meanwhile, Iraqi forces, including waves of foreign jihadists who have been crossing the border throughout the invasion, launch massive swarm-style attacks on the American infantry holding highway overpasses behind the armored spearhead. At one of those overpasses, codenamed Curly, the Americans nearly run out of ammunition. The resupply convoy takes losses fighting its way through. Several trucks explode. But it gets through. Curly holds. American armor is sitting in front of Saddam's presidential palaces. The Iraqi government has fled. Baghdad has fallen. On April 9th, American forces topple the Saddam Hussein statue in Firdos Square. The world's media broadcasts it live. Anchors compare it to the fall of the Berlin Wall, to statues of Lenin coming down across Eastern Europe. It is presented as the definitive image of liberation, a people freed from a tyrant. The reality is more complicated. There are far fewer Iraqis in the square than the camera angles suggest. Iraqi political exiles and U.S. psychological operations personnel are involved in organizing the moment. The broader city is not celebrating uniformly, but the image lands as intended. President Bush's approval rating reaches 71%. On May 1st, he stands on the deck of an aircraft carrier beneath a banner that reads "Mission Accomplished." The banner, technically, refers only to that ship's deployment, but no one watching interprets it that way. The war is over. America won. Except it isn't. And it didn't. By May 2003, 139 American and 33 British troops are dead. Iraqi casualties are harder to measure. Estimates range from 11,000 to 45,000, including roughly 7,400 civilians. No weapons of mass destruction are found. No terrorist training camps. And in the streets of Baghdad, the looting begins. Coalition forces, too few, with no coherent occupation plan, do almost nothing to stop it. Iraqi military depots are left unguarded. Thousands of weapons disappear into the population. Infrastructure is stripped. Government buildings are gutted. For Iraqis who had cautiously hoped that the American invasion might produce something better than Saddam's Iraq, Watching soldiers stand by while their cities are ransacked is not liberation. It is a message that the new power in the country either cannot or will not protect them. Donald Rumsfeld, asked about the looting on camera, shrugs, "Stuff happens." On May 12th, neoconservative administrator Paul Bremer arrives as head of the Coalition Provisional Authority, the body that will govern post-invasion Iraq. He faces contradictory pressures from every direction, and within days, he makes two decisions that many historians now consider the most consequential mistakes of the entire war. He disbands the Iraqi army, and he purges Ba'ath Party members from every level of government. With one signature, hundreds of thousands of armed, trained Iraqi soldiers are unemployed and humiliated. Every experienced administrator, teacher, doctor, and civil servant with any connection to the Ba'ath Party, which, under Saddam, you often had to join simply to hold a government job, is out of work. The insurgency that would consume Iraq for the next decade had many causes. But it had a starting point. And that starting point was the moment America won the war and had no plan for the morning after. Cities in the Sunni heartland that saw almost no fighting during the invasion, Fallujah, Ramadi, Mosul, become hubs for the fighters, the unemployed soldiers, and the foreign jihadists crossing unprotected borders. The war the American military had trained and prepared for was over in 21 days. The war nobody planned for was just beginning. The 2003 invasion of Iraq is one of the most studied military and political events of the 21st century. And it remains one of the most argued about. The American military, at the tactical and operational level, performed remarkably. The speed of the advance, the precision of the strikes, the adaptability of commanders like Perkins in Baghdad, these were genuine achievements. But war is not won at the tactical level alone. The decisions made in Washington, the arguments about troop numbers, the neglect of post-conflict planning, the disbanding of an army, the refusal to anticipate what comes after the shooting stops, those decisions shaped the next decade of American foreign policy and cost far more American and Iraqi lives than the invasion itself. The mission-accomplished banner became, over time, one of the most infamous images in American political history. Not because the soldiers failed, but because the plan ended the moment Baghdad fell.